In this episode, we're going to take the idea of risk analysis and make it feel less like a one-time opinion and more like a disciplined method you can repeat and defend. When you are new to cybersecurity, it's easy to think risk analysis is mostly intuition, where experienced people simply know what is dangerous and what is not. Experience helps, but organizations need something stronger than personal instinct because decisions must be consistent across time, across teams, and across changing leadership. Repeatable methods give you a way to analyze similar situations in similar ways, which reduces bias and makes results easier to compare. Defensible results mean you can explain how you reached a conclusion using evidence, clear assumptions, and logic that another reasonable person can follow. When risk analysis is repeatable and defensible, it becomes useful for decisions rather than just a document people argue about and then ignore. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A repeatable method starts with consistent definitions, because if people use the same words to mean different things, the method collapses immediately. Risk, as a working term, is the combination of how likely an unwanted event is and how severe the impact would be if it happens. But the words likely and severe must be defined in your organizational context. A high impact for one organization might be a minor inconvenience for another, depending on mission, legal obligations, and tolerance for downtime. Repeatability also depends on consistently defining the boundaries of what you are analyzing, such as whether you are analyzing a single system, a business process, or a dependency on a vendor. When the scope is unclear, two analysts can produce different results simply because they consider different things. Defensibility begins here as well, because a clear scope and clear definitions let you explain what you did and what you did not evaluate. Once definitions are stable, a repeatable risk analysis method needs stable inputs, and this is where beginners often underestimate the work. Inputs include the asset or process being analyzed, its criticality and sensitivity, its exposure, its dependencies, and the controls that are supposed to protect it. If you do not know who owns the asset, where it runs, or what data it handles, any later scoring is built on sand. Defensibility improves when inputs are verified, meaning you can point to evidence that the asset exists as described and that key assumptions are accurate. Repeatability improves when the same input fields are collected for every analysis, not just for the convenient cases. Even if some inputs are unknown, capturing unknowns consistently is better than pretending they are not there. A repeatable method treats missing information as a signal that affects confidence, rather than as an excuse to skip hard questions. A useful method also requires you to describe risk as a scenario, not just as a label. A scenario-based description includes what could happen, what would enable it, and what outcome would matter, which keeps the analysis grounded in cause and effect. For example, instead of writing that a system has high risk, you describe an event path such as unauthorized access leading to misuse of sensitive data or service failure leading to operational downtime beyond tolerance. Scenario thinking makes results more defensible because you can explain why the risk exists and which assumptions drive it. It also makes results more actionable because controls can be mapped to parts of the scenario, such as preventing access, detecting abnormal behavior, or restoring service quickly. Beginners sometimes fear scenario writing will be too speculative, but a scenario can be plausible without being dramatic, as long as it is tied to known exposures and realistic weaknesses. The goal is clarity, not storytelling flair. Likelihood assessment is where repeatability is often lost, so a good method uses consistent factors that reduce subjectivity. Instead of guessing whether something will happen, you evaluate conditions that make it more or less plausible, such as external reachability, number of users with access, weakness severity, history of similar incidents, and the maturity of relevant controls. You also consider whether an event requires rare circumstances or whether it could occur through ordinary mistakes and routine misuse. Defensibility improves when you can explain which factors increased or decreased likelihood and what evidence supports those factors. Repeatability improves when the method instructs analysts to consider the same factor set each time, even if the final judgment remains a category rather than a precise number. Beginners should learn that likelihood is often a structured judgment, not a prediction, and structured judgment can be consistent when the reasoning process is consistent. This is why a method focuses on how you reason, not just what number you output. Impact assessment also benefits from structure because impact is often underestimated when people focus only on the technical symptoms. A repeatable approach asks impact questions in categories that matter to the organization, such as operational downtime, data exposure, financial loss, legal consequences, safety effects, and reputational harm. It also considers who is affected, how many people are affected, and how long the harm would last, because duration and scope often drive severity more than the initial event. Defensibility improves when the impact category definitions are written down and tied to recognizable outcomes, rather than vague words like major or minor. Repeatability improves when analysts apply the same impact yardstick across different systems, rather than inflating or shrinking impact based on which team owns the asset. Beginners should notice that impact assessment is where risk analysis connects most clearly to business decision-making, because impact describes what the organization is trying to avoid. When impact is described clearly, risk discussions become less emotional and more practical. A repeatable method must also account for controls, because risk is not evaluated in a vacuum, and controls change both likelihood and impact. The key is to separate control presence from control effectiveness, because a control can exist but still fail when needed. A defensible analysis describes what controls are relevant to the scenario and provides evidence, when possible, that those controls operate consistently. If the control is preventive, you consider whether it meaningfully blocks the unwanted action. If it is detective, you consider whether it notices trouble quickly enough to matter. If it is corrective, you consider whether recovery is reliable. Repeatability improves when the method requires analysts to rate control effectiveness using consistent criteria rather than relying on vague comfort. Beginners should understand that controls are a reason risk differs between two similar systems, and ignoring controls makes results less accurate and less persuasive. A method that examines controls carefully produces results that feel fair and grounded. One of the most important parts of defensible risk analysis is documenting assumptions explicitly, because every analysis includes assumptions even when people pretend it does not. Assumptions might include how much data is stored, how exposed the system is, how quickly a team can respond, or how well a vendor communicates during incidents. If assumptions are hidden, disagreements become personal, because people argue about conclusions without seeing what drove them. If assumptions are visible, disagreements can be productive because people can challenge or refine the specific assumption rather than rejecting the entire analysis. Repeatability improves when analysts use a consistent place to record assumptions, and defensibility improves when assumptions are tied to evidence or marked as uncertain. Beginners should learn that admitting uncertainty is not weakness, it is part of honest analysis. When uncertainty is recorded, it can be reduced later through verification, monitoring, and improved inventory data. Risk scoring or categorization is often used to summarize results, but a repeatable method treats scoring as a communication tool, not as the analysis itself. Whether you use categories like low, medium, and high, or a numeric scale, the score should reflect the underlying reasoning about likelihood, impact, and control effectiveness. Defensibility improves when someone can look at the score and quickly see the scenario, the key factors, and the assumptions that led there. Repeatability improves when the scoring rules are consistent and not adjusted quietly to get a preferred outcome. A common beginner trap is to believe the score is the truth, when the truth is the explanation behind the score. If the method produces a score without a narrative and without evidence, the score becomes easy to dispute and hard to act on. A good method makes the score a doorway into the reasoning, not a substitute for it. Defensible results also require attention to consistency across analysts, because two people using the same method can still drift if calibration is missing. Calibration is the practice of comparing analyses, discussing differences, and aligning interpretations of definitions and scoring guidance. This can be as simple as reviewing a few sample scenarios together and agreeing on what counts as high impact or what conditions justify a high likelihood rating. Repeatability improves when calibration is periodic because the organization learns and refines its understanding over time. Defensibility improves because leaders can trust that the method produces similar outcomes regardless of who performs the analysis. Beginners should appreciate that calibration is how organizations reduce bias in politics and risk work because it creates shared standards rather than private judgment. It also makes risk analysis more teachable, which is essential when teams grow or when turnover occurs. Without calibration, a method exists on paper but not in practice. Another ingredient for defensible results is traceability, meaning you can trace each conclusion back to inputs and evidence. Traceability matters because risk decisions often lead to spending, exceptions, or changes that others may question later. If someone asks why a risk was accepted, you should be able to point to the assessed impact, the likelihood factors, the controls in place, and the reason the residual risk fit tolerance at that time. If someone asks why a mitigation was prioritized, you should be able to show how the scenario could produce unacceptable outcomes and how the treatment reduces either likelihood or impact. Repeatability improves when the method requires analysts to reference the same types of evidence, such as inventory records, operational incident patterns, or documented control tests. Beginners should understand that traceability is not just for audits, it is for learning and accountability. When results are traceable, the organization can improve methods, correct mistakes, and build trust in the process. Risk analysis becomes more defensible when it includes confidence and uncertainty as part of the output, because not all results are equally supported by evidence. A high-confidence assessment is one where key inputs are verified, control effectiveness is evidenced, and the scenario is supported by known patterns and exposures. A low-confidence assessment might involve unknown data classification, unclear ownership, or untested recovery processes, which means the risk could be higher or lower than stated. Repeatability improves when confidence is scored or categorized using consistent criteria because it prevents analysts from hiding doubt in vague language. Defensibility improves because decision-makers can treat low-confidence risks as reasons to gather information rather than as final truths. Beginners should learn that confidence is itself a decision input, because a low-confidence, high-impact area often deserves attention simply because uncertainty around severe outcomes is dangerous. This mindset shifts risk work from pretending to know to deliberately reducing what you do not know. A repeatable method should also connect analysis to treatment options in a consistent way, because analysis that does not lead to decisions is not very useful. Once the scenario, likelihood, impact, and control effectiveness are clear, you can evaluate whether the risk is within tolerance, whether it needs mitigation, whether the activity should be avoided, or whether parts of the burden can be transferred through contracts. Defensibility improves when treatment recommendations clearly connect to the analysis, such as selecting controls that break the scenario chain or reduce impact through recoverability improvements. Repeatability improves when similar risks lead to similar recommended treatment patterns, unless a clear difference in context explains the exception. Beginners should notice that treatment is not a separate talent from analysis. It is the next logical step, and a well-built method makes that step feel natural. When treatment is tied to analysis, persuasion becomes easier because you are showing a logical path from facts to action. To conclude, performing risk analysis with repeatable methods and defensible results means building a consistent process that others can follow, challenge, and trust without relying on one person's instincts. Repeatability comes from clear definitions, stable inputs, scenario-based descriptions, structured likelihood and impact reasoning, consistent control effectiveness evaluation, and periodic calibration across analysts. Defensibility comes from evidence, explicit assumptions, traceability, and honest communication of confidence and uncertainty, all of which make results easier to explain and harder to dismiss. Scoring can help summarize, but the true strength of the method is the reasoning and documentation that sit behind any score. When these practices are in place, risk analysis becomes a reliable form of decision support that improves over time instead of a one-off report that becomes stale. If you can produce an assessment that another person can reproduce, understand, and defend in a conversation, you have reached the core goal of this topic: risk analysis that holds up under scrutiny and still guides practical action.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.